Hey guys, welcome to this week's Roundup. As you can see, everything's gone. This is the last one in my old apartment, so sorry if it's a little bit echoey today, but next week I will be coming to you from New York City. So hopefully this will all go smoothly. But I got a great show today, an awesome interview with Voltar, and a bunch of cool news and Q&As as usual, so let's get right to it. First up is a little bit more news on the Nintendo Switch. According to Eurogamer, it'll come with a 6.2-inch 720p capacitive touchscreen that is multi-touch capable. So that would essentially make it pretty much like the Wii U controller, but maybe they'll finally take advantage of it and have more options for it. But other than that, Nintendo tweeted that on January 12th, they'll be announcing the price, launch date, and software lineup of the Switch. So I really wouldn't expect too much more info before that. Although I've already seen a million videos on YouTube with everybody speculating, and they all get thousands and thousands of hits. I just don't get it. But that is the official news for now. The Eurogamer thing, I'm not sure if that's official, but it makes sense to me. And I'm glad that at least the screen is going to be a higher quality resolution, because the screen of the 3DS and even the Wii U touchpad, it was pretty low res. So hopefully it'll be an improvement and they'll put it to good use this time. Next, the creator of the Rayman series of games found his original SNES prototype of the original Rayman game, and apparently it still works. So, I guess rumor has it that the SNES development was halted because Ubisoft wanted to release it on the more powerful consoles, and they did end up releasing the first Rayman game on the PlayStation 1, the Jaguar, and the Saturn, and maybe a few others later on as re-releases. But the SNES prototype still works, still runs at 60 frames per second, and the developer was talking about maybe even releasing it as a virtual console game or a Switch game or something. I'm not sure if he was just being silly, but still thought it was really cool and definitely wanted to show the pictures of it. There's a software developer that's rebuilding an N64 Zelda game to be pretty much like Zelda Link's Awakening for the Game Boy. I don't want to say he's porting it over because it's a complete rewrite, so it's not going to be a 2D version. It'll look exactly like Ocarina of Time, the 3D Zelda, but the actual game and the towns and everything are going to be matched up as closely as possible to Link's Awakening. I think that's a really awesome idea, and a few years ago, people were actually doing the opposite. There was a team of people taking Ocarina of Time and trying to make it a top-down 2D game, and I think that ended up getting abandoned after a while. But stuff like this is always a lot of fun, and any way you could experience a classic game like that in a different way is never a bad thing. And my favorite of these, of course, has been another Metroid 2 remake, which I will boldly say that I think it's better than the original. So I hope all these software developers keep them coming. And there's no ROM available for this yet, but there is a demo video. So I'll keep everybody updated, and as soon as something's playable, I'll definitely report back on it. There's some progress being made on a new RGB mod for 3DO consoles. Now, this RGB mod's only compatible with the VP536 chip, which I believe is most commonly found in the top loader, not the front loader. But it's looking for a possible demo in January or February, which means it would go into production right after that. So this is timed really well because Otaku Store, I think that's how you pronounce it, but they've either run out of stock or have stopped selling their 3DO mod. And this one's going to have a bunch more features and a bunch of other cool things in it. So I'll keep everybody posted. There's nothing really to show now, but if you have a 3DO that you're looking to RGB mod, I would pop open the case and see which chip you have to see if it's compatible with this one, because so far this is looking like the best one you can get for it. Nintendo released their console sales figures last week, and I actually found it kind of interesting, and certainly wanted to at least report about it to put it into perspective. So the original NES sold 62 million, the SNES sold 49 million, the Wii U sold 101 million, which is pretty incredible. It means that gaming's really reaching that many more people. Obviously, there's more population too, but it's kind of cool just to see how everything's growing. But then you get to the Wii U, and they've sold 13 million. So that's almost a tenth of what they sold in Wii's. So that's not looking good for Nintendo, and I really hope they're able to pick up sales with the Switch and kind of get back on top of their game. The user Greenalink on the SMS forums just uploaded a long, detailed video about the differences between the Sega Master System and Game Gear versions of the Sonic the Hedgehog game. Now, these games are different than the Genesis one. They're pretty much the same, but they're completely different than Genesis. So the SMS and Game Gear are very similar, and this video shows the differences between the two and kind of shows different side-by-sides of each area, and I thought it was really cool. Definitely worth flipping through if you're a fan of the game. The company Tectoy has been teasing a big announcement for today. So I don't have any info on it because the announcement will go live probably about the same time as the podcast. But right now, all there is a website with a mailing list and a few details being teased. And it looks like it's another Genesis console. But rumors have it that it's not just another import of the At Games all-in-one console and that it's actually a brand new thing. So in the past, Tectoy has made some really great stuff and some really crappy stuff. So I'm crossing my fingers and hoping it's an FPGA-based HDMI outputting Genesis console. And I really hope it's something that, us retro gamers would really be interested in. Something that's integer scaling, no lag, very accurate. Maybe it'll even have analog outputs and HDMI. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed, and I'll tweet about it as soon as their announcement's made. But the link is in the description as well for, for anybody that wants to check it out. And let's all cross our fingers and hope it comes out pretty good. There's been another update to the Game Boy interface software. This update has a few bug fixes, some optimizing of the video rendering, and then 2 other filters have been added. So it's pretty cool, and I'm really glad there's still progress on it. And for anybody who's probably just catching these and doesn't know what the Game Boy interface is, it's for the GameCube's Game Boy Player. If you run the Game Boy interface software instead of the Game Boy Player startup disk, you get a lot more options, a lot more accurate gameplay, and a lot less lag. So for anybody that's interested, I'll leave the link in the description. I saw something kind of silly I figured I'd share with everybody. The largest arcade machine replica ever built is now available for purchase. It costs about $100,000 and weighs 1,200 pounds. So it's absolutely silly, which is why I had to show a picture of it. krikzz just released a new firmware for the EverDrive N8. That's the EverDrive compatible with Nintendo and Famicom consoles. This has support for a lot more mappers and a few bug fixes built in. So if you're currently using an EverDrive N8, I would definitely recommend getting this and seeing if hopefully the new mappers he added were enough to add a lot more games to the compatibility list. And for the last bit of news, both of the major sellers of RGB SCART cables have each announced kind of cool new products that I just wanted to mention. Since they have similar names, I'll refer to them by their location. So Retro Gaming Cables is from the UK, and Retro Console Accessories is from the US. So the UK seller is now using PCBs in the SCART heads to wire their cables, which means the connections are stronger, and it probably allows a lot more features to be jammed in without just having a mess of wires in there. I actually first saw this, I think, 3 years ago when Arcade TV, Alex, made these for his cables, and I'm really glad to see the manufacturers actually putting these in their SCART cables as well, because it should help for longer lasting and to add more features. Next, the US seller is offering something kind of interesting. It's a cable designed to go from an Extron RXI directly into a FrameMeister. So I'm really glad they made this, because up until now, if you wanted to use an Extron RXI, you'd have to get a BNC to SCART cable, and then a SCART to FrameMeister cable. So you have to buy 2 things, and anytime there's more connections, it's one more thing that could possibly go wrong. But this one plugs directly into the BNC outputs, and even has a Phoenix connector to go into the audio output, and then goes directly into the FrameMeister. So this is perfect for the scenario that I generally recommend, where you have something like a G-SCART switch, take the VGA output of that and put it into the Extron RXI, and if you use a 203, you actually have 3 total inputs in it, so you could use your Dreamcast or really anything else, and then feed that into your FrameMeister. And by adding the RXI box in it, you have a lot more control over little tweaks here and there, but you also are able to use Sync on Green, so from PlayStation 2 and a few other consoles, to go directly into the FrameMeister. So I'm really glad they're making cables like this. I know custom cables are hard to make, and anything with BNC cables is very costly to make. But I'm really glad to see them doing it, and I'm glad both major cable sellers are always trying to improve their products and get new stuff out. So it's very cool, and hopefully I'll be able to get one in for testing pretty soon. And now on to the Q&A stuff. Watson Punk posted in regards to the question talked about last week on where to get Super Nintendo plugs for the multi-out ends, so what you would find at the end of an RGB cable if you wanted to make your own. Last week I said try to find cheap cables from PlayAsia and cut them off and just open them up and use those. And Watson Punk reminded me that hdretrovision actually sells really high quality SNES plugs that you could make your own cables with, which is really embarrassing because those are friends of mine and I should have known that. So sorry, Steve and Nick. Didn't mean to forget about you guys. But yeah, you could buy a 3-pack really cheaply and make all your own cables if you want. And for me personally, there was a bunch of really weird projects I was working on where I needed like composite, S-video, and RGB out. And I wanted to add a bunch of stuff to it. So using these would have actually been the perfect thing. So if anybody needs them, that's where to get them. Next, Sandro Castellani posted a bunch of really good info on that Nintendo DS dev kit I showed last week. And he said with his, if you use single outputs, so each screen has its own out, they're actually in 240p, and it's only if you need both on one screen that it's 480i. He also said that his Nitro capture, so mine was the Nitro emulator, does play retail cartridges and flash cards. He also said that later models don't have the N64 DAC, but they actually have the GameCube one, so you wouldn't be able to put 2 of Tim's kits in there to make RGB output. So the more I'm learning about these, the more I realize that each one is a little bit different, because I've had people say that they own a capture and it does not play retailed carts. So, it's kind of interesting to find these things out in the wild, and I would love to test a capture version that does play retail carts to see, because I think having it with 2 RGB monitors would be a blast to play DS games. So if anybody else has more info on theirs, or just wants to trade my emulator for a capture, I don't know why you'd want to, but hey, it's out there. Just let me know and post in the comments. But thank you very much to Sandra for putting all that info up. 01 Phoenix 79 posted in regards to the conversation we were having last week about the Retrode and Raspberry Pi gaming, and he said there's actually a Kickstarter out there that is trying to have a case that integrates both the Retrode and the Raspberry Pi into one case. So I thought that was pretty cool and something that I'd probably be interested in. It basically just looks like a Retrode that you could put your own Raspberry Pi into and then use the controllers and cartridges directly for it. So that seems pretty usable. Seems like something that might actually be kind of fun to work with. And he said that they're still working on the software for it as well, and hopefully that'll be released separately. I can't imagine that they would make it exclusive, but I'll post links to both the Kickstarter as well as the software that would link the two together for anybody interested. But I'm still messing around with my Raspberry Pi every now and then, and I'm having fun with it, but I really want to dig in to see how much lag is really in it, how accurate it is, but hopefully I'll have time to work on that soon. I received an email from somebody named Jeremiah who was looking to take a component video signal and run it through his SCART switch, knowing that when he goes between RGB and component, you have to flick a switch on your monitor, but he still just wanted to route it through. And I had post pictures on my website in different places of adapters that do exactly this, but it's really hard to find them now. My buddy James actually found a place in Australia that gets them, but they don't ship outside of the country. So I think he set up a way where you're able to order a bunch. So if anybody's interested, check out the picture. Maybe we could do like a group buy or something. Maybe I can get like 20 of them, and they're very cheap. So, if you were looking to buy one, maybe buy 2 just to have. But maybe we do a group buy, relatively soon, have them shipped to America, and then we just ship them out from here. Because generally speaking, we don't have to deal with import taxes in the U.S., and shipping it out to other places, they're small enough little adapters that they'll probably just fit in those, one-rate bubble mailers. So it'd be probably pretty cheap to do. But if anybody's interested in that, definitely let me know in the comments, because at the very least, myself and Jeremiah are going to get a few. I know my cousin Scott will probably get a bunch, and a few of my other friends, I'll probably pick up 7 or 8 of them just because I know as soon as I get them, a few of my buddies are going to want one too. So definitely post in the comments if you're interested, and we'll just order one big batch of them, and I'll distribute them out. Okay, now on to the interview with Voultar. I had a lot of fun talking with him, and the interview went great, but there was a bunch of technical issues with it. So I almost never edit any of the interviews I do, because I just kind of like that it's an open chat and there's nothing really formal. There was 1 or 2 times where the connection dropped out, so I stitched 2 together. There was one where I set a wrong release date, so I just cut that out. But this one, there's like 3 different parts to it. It's stitched together. So sorry, hopefully it flows well enough still, but we talk about a ton of great stuff. He's going to have a bunch of products up for sale pretty soon, and I'll have guides to match the products that he's selling up on my website really soon. So they might not be up by the time this podcast airs, but definitely if you buy something from him, by the time it gets to you, the guide will be up on the site, so you could feel free to do it. But we got a bunch of very cool products, cool stuff to talk about. I got to have him back on again because he's a lot of fun. He actually was a little tame during the interview. He's kind of nuts, and I love it. So hopefully you guys enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed talking. And hopefully there's a lot of good stuff in here that applies to your retro gaming setup, because we talk about a ton of different stuff. So strap in and prepare for Voultar. Hey guys, I am here with Voultar. How you doing, man?
Hey man, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. So thanks for doing this. Been emailing and talking with you a lot these past few months, and man, we got a lot to talk about. So hopefully I'll try my best not to ramble through this. But...
Alrighty.
So for the people, people who aren't,
Here you go.
The people that are watching that are not familiar with your work yet, your name is Zach. You are Voltar on all the forums. You're from the U.S. and you're a modder that contributes a lot to the scene, actually.
That's right.
How did you get started into modding? Were you like, were you one of those kids that took everything apart, or was there one thing you needed to mod that kind of got you started?
Yeah, I've been doing that since I was probably 3 or 4 years old. I can remember sitting on my grandfather's lap taking apart digital clocks and VCRs, and he would show me how to put it back together. Usually, when I'd put it back together, there'd be about a dozen screws missing. But yeah, I've just always enjoyed that.
Awesome. Yeah. What was the first like console thing you modded? The actual like video game mod that you set out to do?
The first video game console thing that I set out to do was probably just a soft mod for the Xbox back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, it was actually, that's pretty much one of my things. Soldering the BIOS jumper together so that you could flash it with the custom firmware.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I always remember taking stuff apart. I remember I had a power-based converter that stopped working, and I took it apart assuming that I would see what was wrong with it. I was probably 11 years old, like as if I would open it up and go, "Oh yeah, look,
That's it. I found it." Right.
Yeah,
I did that too.
The first actual intentional thing was probably that or maybe replacing the 72-pin connector in a NES, but that doesn't really count as modding, I guess. So
I can't tell you how many Nintendos I fixed just by taking them apart and putting them back together.
Really?
As a kid. Oh yeah, absolutely. I would go to a flea market or something and buy a Nintendo for back then $4 or $5 for just a front loader that had nothing with it. I'd bring it home. It wouldn't work. I'd take it apart and I'd blow the ZIF socket out or something. Mm-hmm. Put it back together. It was flawless for about 2 days. But I was good.
Yep.
I was good.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. I remember we were all, when we hit like drinking age, we all hit 21, and we came back from the bar one day, and oh, hey guys, I figured out how to fix your old Nintendo. Check it out. And the next thing you know, there's 10 people all crowded around playing Tecmo Bowl or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of funny how that stuff works, but
right. That's how it started, though. I mean, just blowing a few old Nintendos. That sounds really dirty.
Yep. Yes, it does.
Yep. Right.
So what? You got a bunch of stuff for sale on your website. You've put a bunch of guides up on the forums. Like, when did you start to really make this thing like a real hobby? Something that you stuck with and not just an occasional thing.
That site really blows, and I'm in the process of overhauling everything on it. I apologize to anybody who goes there to buy anything. I actually everything right now, every correspondence, every order is being handled via email. So I just wanted to say that I'm working on that. But I guess a couple, probably 2013. I did a lot of PlayStation mods, and more specifically PlayStation 2 mods. Hard mods for the PlayStation 2. It's uncommon. It's hard to find that service because shipping PlayStation 2 it's not the easiest thing in the world, and it does require a considerable amount of soldering skill. Which I've always been a pretty proficient solderer, so I started modding PlayStation 2s, and it really took off. I had a lot of people asking me to do it. There were maybe two other guys that I know of in the scene at that time that were really effective at doing that, and that I would recommend to other people. But I would say that that's really where it all started, as far as turning it into something that was. It's always a hobby on the weekend. It's always something that I enjoy to do, but with the PlayStation 2 stuff, that's when it kind of in the PlayStation stuff, that's when it started to turn into something that was kind of lucrative. That kind of grew. It all grew from that.
I remember trying one of those mods myself, and this was before I really did any kind of console modding other than the Xbox thing, and it was not easy at all. I'm pretty sure I
No.
got one and it worked for like a week, and then I probably had a cold solder joint and it stopped. And I ended up using one of the swap magic discs, which was a royal pain. But
Yeah, I remember those. Did you use that on the? Was this the PlayStation 2 or the PlayStation 1?
PlayStation 2,
Yeah. Did you have the front loader? Did you have the fat or the slim?
the fat.
I'm just wondering.
Yep.
Oh yes. So that was a pain then, because
You have to slide the tool in and get it just at the right time.
To eject the tray without the PlayStation 2 knowing you ejected it. God, that was a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hated that too.
Have you ever done any of the video mods on the PlayStation 2? Because I know a few motherboard revisions you could actually do a straight RGB HV mod, so you could get, VGA signal pretty much through all resolutions.
I haven't done that, but I imagine I've probably worked with that chip or that DAC that's responsible for that. That would be really easy to do.
If your motherboard has that,
If your
revision chip
motherboard
and
has that
everything.
particular IC. Now the PlayStation, a lot of people back during the sort of the hype of the whole RGB thing, during the XRGB, right in the middle between the XRGB3 and the FrameMeister sort of transition, a lot of people sent me, and I thought it was kind of silly, but they sent me PlayStation 1 consoles to modify for C-Sync output. I burped, excuse me. The C-Sync output on their PlayStation 1s. So that was just simply a matter of removing composite video. Excuse me, removing composite video and sending TTL C-Sync through the that pin of the AV connector on the PlayStation.
Yeah, some model PS1s you could actually just pull. I believe you could pull C-Sync directly off of one of the chips. Not every
That's
one
right.
of them, but yeah.
The PS1, the smaller form factor, it has a consolidated chip that has an encoder and some other logic on it that you can do that to. You can do that with, but actually, you can do that with all PlayStation revisions. The earlier PlayStation revisions, other than the small PS1 Mini, they just use the standard 1645 Sony encoder, 1645. So the C-Sync is C-Sync. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. That's been 30 years ago. I'm an old man. But you can do it. You can do it to all PlayStations across the board. C-Sync is no problem. I don't know why you just wouldn't want to put a sync stripper in circuit to get a TTL C-Sync, but it's a lot easier.
Two things that are the most common, and it's a lot of times. I might have talked to Tim about this or something as well, but a lot of people seem to confuse why I recommended that sync stripper in the SCART head, and it's simply for people whose systems aren't compatible with anything other than C-Sync. So, for example, the Extron crosspoint switches, I had a 16-port VGA switch, And the signal that was coming out of my console was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. You use a capture card and it's perfect.
Right.
But to use Luma or composite video, it would not work through the Switch. So then I just added the sync stripper to the head, and it was perfect. Problem solved. But a lot of people complain about the crosshatch pattern, the color bleed, and everything. And that, I would assume, is why they would want it on the console end of things, so it doesn't travel up the cable and kind of have all that interference.
Well, like you said, there are two reasons why people want to use C-Sync over syncing on composite. The first reason is for those particular monitors and line doublers and scalers that require a higher voltage or a TTL C-Sync level for it to be active. That's one reason. Not because necessarily you want to clean the sync signal up to remove any sort of coupling, like chroma coupling, but you just need the signal to be at TTL level for a particular device. That's one reason. The second reason is, a lot of times, due to the nature of the chroma signal itself, as it travels up that wire to your SCART hood or whatever kind of cable you're using, it will couple into other things. So a lot of people like to use a C-Sync signal, which for people who don't know what composite sync is simply horizontal and vertical synchronization pulses that are composited into one signal. People who use that, though, composite sync, to remove any artifacting, any checkerboarding, any coupling. Coupling could be a crosshatch pattern, a checkerboarding effect, sort of a Moore pattern that's not caused from taking a picture. It's just in the it's in the display. A lot of people do that. A lot of people do that incorrectly, but when that really started to take off, a lot of people were confused about. They really confused themselves about why they would really even need C-Sync or what they wanted C-Sync to do for them.
Yeah, it's still a question I get on a regular basis is what's the best sync to use? And it's such a complicated thing to answer. I try for the very beginners just to say, use C-Sync, when possible, then use Luma, and then composite video if needed. Right. But it's
or sync on Luma. Sync on Luma is fine for Luma, all things.
Exactly.
That are syncing on Luma is perfectly fine for anything that's for 75 ohm load or 75 ohm terminations. A lot of times, people spend a lot of time investing in a sync stripping setup like an LM1881 for just a standard television or monitor that does 75 ohm terminations. When they don't need that, they could just sync on Luma, and it would be just as effective, and it would be just as clean. That's just my opinion. I'm just telling you how it is, Bob. I'm just telling you how it is.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the many reasons I really liked the G-SCART Switch is because you don't have to worry about any of this. You just plug in your consoles. You either get C-Sync or Luma cables depending on which console it is, and then that's it. And even if you want to split the signal between like a FrameMeister and an RGB monitor, or an RGB monitor and a capture card or something. You don't even have to worry. You just flip the switches and do what needs to be done. So,
right. That is nice. That's awfully handy.
Yeah, I hope he's able to keep stock a little more regularly on that thing because it's very often out of stock or not able for pre-ordered. So,
yeah, it's a nice switch. It's a nice switcher. He's done a pretty good job on that.
Yeah. All right, we're back. We had some technical difficulties there. Sorry, guys.
I don't know what happened, Bob. Just he's not on top of his game today.
Yep. All right. Well, the main reason I wanted you on here was to talk about the boards that we've been emailing back and forth about for a while. Different boards for different consoles, and I guess I wanted to start with the SNES mini board that you did. So I guess you and I have been calling it the basic board, but we should probably come up with a better name for it than that because it's not very basic. But so for anybody that doesn't know, and I'll make this super quick just because I'm sure everybody here listening already knows this, but the SNES Mini does not output RGB or S-Video without a modification. It's pretty easy to add, all things considered. All you need is some wire and some resistors and capacitors and stuff. But this is the mod that I get the most emails about, and it's always the same scenario. Somebody buys a pre-modded console on eBay. Something is very wrong with it. They email me and say, hey, I saw your site. Can you offer any help? And I always say, hey, could you just open it up? They send me pictures of like resistors and capacitors piled on top of a wad of glue, sort of haphazardly soldered to stuff.
Right.
So I wanted somebody to create a board that hopefully could just stop this from happening. All you need to do is just connect a bunch of stuff. So basically, on these SNES Minis, obviously I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to the people listening. On these
Obviously.
SNES Minis, you take the sRGB chip, the onboard amplifier, and you would connect red, green, blue, and sync, and then YC, Luma, and Chroma, and then run wires to the multi-out, and then connect a few components in between. I've had guides on how to do this for a while. There's a bunch of different ways. But if somebody's insisting on doing it that way, even though there's a few easier ways, which we'll talk about in a minute, I thought, why not just make a cheap board with a bunch of components built into it? And that way, maybe we could start to have everybody see these things where we see bad consoles on eBay. Just say, hey, this board's super cheap. It'll probably save you money in the long run anyway. Why don't you just do that? Also, and for people that want to use the stock encoder, because I know a lot of people, I guess you'd want to call them purists, say that if Nintendo put this chip on it, that's the chip we should be using. So you came up with a pretty nifty board that allows you to do just that. You got to take off the heat shield and solder to the very, very tiny pins, which if you're a beginner at soldering, it's really annoying and really hard. It's a little bit annoying for me too, even though I've probably done 50 of them since I started the website. And
Yeah, it is annoying.
Flux is your friend for stuff like that, but
Absolutely.
you just solder the wires. I like to run them through some heat shrink tubing to keep them nice and neat. Run them right around, cut them to size. And you even on that board had a kind of a pretty creative way of attenuating the brightness. And that's something I'll talk about in a minute too, but just to stay on this board, where you just add 3 wires directly to the vias. So all you really need is, to do it right, you need your board, a cheap flux pen you can get off of Amazon, and some wire. And obviously a solder and soldering gun, but
And I may even include the wire. So you just need a soldering basic soldering a soldering pencil and a little flux, and you can have that done in 10 or 15 minutes.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and even people that this is the first time soldering something, because I know a lot of people, I get emails that, your site's really cool and I appreciate all the info, but I just want to mod this one console and move along.
Right. They can't justify the purchase of some of the equipment they'd have to use
Right.
because they don't want to make a habit of doing stuff like that. And that's I get that a lot too. I get
Right.
that a lot. I get that a whole lot.
And that actually brings me to the other board that you designed. That I think there's actually a few of them coming out. Bordy already released his design to the public. Peter Bartman Bordy, the guy that did the original design. I know there's a few people that are coming out with them, and yours is an onboard amplifier. So all you need to do is connect from the bottom of the board 3 vias, the 3 little holes, they call them vias. You put your little flux pen on them, add some solder, add some
Right.
wires to those, and connect them to this board, and it slides right over the multi-out. And it's got the higher quality THS 7374 chip.
That's right.
And that, to me, I have a strong opinion about this, in that if you're a beginner to intermediate and you just want an easy solution, I would always recommend this one. It's infinitely easier soldering to the holes than it is to the other thing. You don't even need to take the heat shield off. You just unbolt it. And the other thing that's more of an opinion is some people prefer the look of this chip versus the stock encoder. They think it's actually a little sharper. I like it a lot. Firebrand X says he prefers it, and that guy clearly has an eye for things, an eye for detail.
Yeah, absolutely. He does.
I've heard a lot of people say, well, it's not the way Nintendo recommended. It's just the same. It's not the same. Whether it's
I have a
better or
problem
not-
with that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have
No.
a problem with. I understand. I understand the sentiment of what people mean when they say that, but Nintendo. Nintendo didn't even intend for you to have RGB or S video on the SNES Mini, so that's
Right.
kind of a moot point. Nintendo didn't even care to properly standardize or use have a correct output on the RGB signals off the one chip.
Yeah, they're all
So
too bright.
I mean, if we're gonna talk about authenticity, I mean, are we going to really argue that we should use something that isn't correct out of the gate. I mean, that's just me. I think the stock encoder is absolutely fine. A lot of people there in the very beginning, a lot of people in the very beginning um, made boards, just like you were talking about, with the 7314. Which is the 3-channel variant of the 7374. Plus, it has a low-pass filter that's hardwired into the buffer or the driver. You can't turn it off.
Right, and just to make it easier for the rest of this interview, let's just call it the 13 and the 70, or the 14 and the 74, because otherwise it's going to confuse the heck out of me.
I'm already confused. You've confused the shit out of me now.
The THS 7314.
Okay, the 14
3-channel amp
and the 74. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's the 3-channel amp that has a low-pass filter built in that softens the image, and not really in the best of ways all the time. Right. And the THS 7374 is a 4-channel amp that you are allowed to turn the filter completely off, which is a very, very sharp image. And other than that, it's pretty much the same. So you get the same all the benefits without the filter.
Well, when people really started banging out, and I did this for years too, or not for years, but I did this for quite a while. I just never sold it directly. This 7314 video driver for the SNES and N64. I just used it for my internal mod work, for people who wanted that. But a lot of people, I guess, during the whole genesis of doing the RGB bypass modifications for the Super Nintendo, which also inadvertently worked, or conveniently enough worked for the Nintendo 64 too. You could use the same board at the time. But at any rate, when people started using that circuit, a lot of people, or some people, were kind of disingenuous about it, and they were trying to tell people, or they were trying to advertise it as the 7314 RGB bypass board is the only way to correctly output RGB from your Super Nintendo. That the sRGB encoder wasn't correct, it wasn't right, and that it wouldn't work with some displays, or it wouldn't work with many displays at all. That really burned my ass, and it was total horseshit. I don't know why anybody would.
Confusion going on about that, and I could understand. I could actually understand the mistake, but I think the mistake was that they tested the signal, or I'm assuming is they must have tested the signals, got the wrong voltage, and assumed it was wrong, and assumed that there was no way to correct it, and that's kind of I always recommended the amp mod just because I genuinely find it much easier, but. That was one of the things is when the guys on, I think it was Assembler Games, I think it was Ultron and Bordy working together, found the whole attenuating the brightness thing, to correct the signal. I didn't even realize that could also be done with the in-stock encoder. And I caught a lot of flack for that as well. A couple the usual forum trolls kept saying, you got to stop trying to sell these boards. You're trying to convince people to buy them or something. And I think maybe a lot of the different people got mixed up on who was saying what. But I do understand how that distinction could be made. But yeah, it was annoying, all the misinformation flying around.
Yeah, it was for me. A lot of people would ask me, and at this time, and I'm not in any way. This has nothing to do with you, or I'm not talking about you in any respect.
Even if it was, bring it on, man.
No. You're not a douche like that. But at any rate, a lot of customers were coming to me, or people that weren't my customers at the time, and they were asking me. Somebody's trying to sell me this board. I have an SNES Mini. I'd like to have RGB outputs on it, an RGB output on it. If someone is trying to sell me a board, a 7314 video driver for $40 at the time, $40 for that board. And they said that this is the only way to properly output RGB from my system, that if I use whatever components that are on board, more than likely it won't get along with the majority of the equipment that I use, or the majority of the equipment that I may even buy in the future for it. Mm-hmm. And I know who did it, and I know who said that to him. I'm not gonna get into all that, but when that shit started happening, I got really pissed off about it, because a lot of people were taking advantage over just a complete fallacy that made no sense whatsoever, and it was by somebody who people who were doing that had no idea of what the fuck they were talking about. They didn't even have an elementary understanding of electronics, much less video signals.
Mhm.
And that's when I kind of went on a little crusade of myself, not to be an asshole or mean to people, but just to try to clear some of that misinformation out for mods that were similar to that. And I kind of have the whole 7314 amp revolution was kind of bittersweet for me because it's an excellent solution. It's very simple to do. The results are they're really good, but I felt like a lot of people got needlessly taken advantage of
Yeah.
in the midst of all that.
And,
So
I definitely I didn't quite grasp what I was the concept of when I was telling people, I thought the 7314 looked better, because everything I said so far, although the technical reasons why were wrong in many cases, the bottom line was if you just took RGBS from the sRGB encoder, the onboard on the Mini, through some 75 ohm resistors and did that output versus a 7314, in my opinion, the 7314 did look better. But once I understood about attenuating the brightness and about what was going on with that, and I think we should talk a little bit about that as well, but when you set the brightness correctly from the video chip itself before it goes into any amp at all, it's pretty much identical. And I think, I think anybody that uses the stock chip and does it right versus the 7314 versus the 7374, you're talking about, as long as they're all done correctly, you're talking about three very, very close things. It's my opinion that if you have a sloppy mod done, you should redo it eventually anyway, even if it's just for yourself. But if you have a good mod done with the 7314 board, I wouldn't take it out. I would make sure that you add those resistors in to attenuate the brightness, though. And that is something I figured would be good to talk about now as well, because this affects even one chip 01 and 02, the ones that don't need an RGB mod at all for them. So basically, I'm going to say it in layman's terms, and I would like you to explain it a little bit more detailed, because clearly I'm not going to get that deep into it. But basically, my whole thing was that I misunderstood what the actual brightness coming from the video chip meant, because in my mind, brightness just meant you just turn your RGB monitor down one hair on the brightness and everything's fine. What I didn't seem to realize was that when it was coming out of the video chip itself, even before it gets into the amplifier, it was still too hot of a signal, which caused things like ringing and ghosting. And that's why you can get different consoles that have different quality outputs like that depending on the mod. And when I'm pretty sure it was Ultron and Bordy, but I'm really sorry if I'm wrong, figured out that you just put certain resistors between the amp and that main chip, that you could actually correct it and get a crystal clear signal. So do you want to talk a little bit more about what that actually is and why we do that?
So what happens is in the land of video signals, we have certain standards that we have to strictly abide by. Video is not like it's not what looks best is best. Like audio is, well, if it sounds good, whatever sounds good, whatever sounds the best, let's use that. Video signals abide by a very strict set of standards. Analog video across the board is 0.7 volts peak to peak, and it's designed for 75 ohm loads. What happens with the one chip, and I'm not going to, I may jumble this up because I'll try to give an elementary explaining of this without trying to get too technical, and I might even fuck that up, so pardon me. What happens with the one chip is, we can't curse on this, can't we, Barbara?
Yes.
Good. What happens with the one chip is that the analog outputs, the RGB outputs from the one chip itself, are kind of high. They're about 0.1 volts higher than the signal standard norm. Signal standard norm is 0.7 volts peak to peak. The one chip is 0.8 and some change. What happens is, and a lot of people think it's just a lot of people believe that that's just a brightness issue. When your signal load, when it's higher than the standard, not only is your brightness going to be affected, because remember, RGB includes luminosity, and it includes hue and contrast, color and luminosity. What happens is not only are your colors affected, they're slightly washed out, but the luminosity increases too. So you get a washed out picture, or you'll get a picture that's, I won't say washed out, but you can definitely tell that the colors are a little dry. You'll get some ringing in the picture, some shimmering effects, and a lot of sort of you can get a lot of dithering patterns, kind of like if you use a shitty RGB cable and you get a checkerboarding or crosshatch from chroma coupling. You can get that too. What happens is nobody until recently measured the peak-to-peak voltage of the analogs of the RGB signals on an actual scope.
Because
to really
that's
calculate.
not something you could do with a multimeter, right? You need to have an all-white screen and an oscilloscope hooked up to it, correct?
You need to see the peak-to-peak voltage under a full load. So a full load. That's going to get some laughs. But a white solid screen, if you have a flash card, if you have some sort of way of projecting or having the PPU or the one chip of your Super Nintendo output a solid white image, measure it
240p
then.
test suite's probably the
240,
easiest one. Yep.
yeah, absolutely. Fantastic guy who wrote that.
Yep.
Fantastic bunch. Yep. And great software. Put that on there. Put your white screen on there. Measure the peak-to-peak voltage on your RG and B outputs, and calculate what it is. You need to do that, though, in order for that to be accurate and precise, you need to do that under a peak luma condition, under peak luma conditions, which is a solid white screen, to be under a full load. So when you do that with the one chip, you get a 0.8 ish peak-to-peak voltage output signal from the RGB outputs. That's about that's a 0.1 volt and some change higher than the standardized video signal, which will yield a brighter, shittier picture. Well, what they figured out in that form is, or that thread is, okay, the signal's a lot higher here. Let's just put a voltage divider in there, and let's just bring it down 0.1 volts. That's exactly what they did. So they just did it's a really simple little formula calculation to determine what the pull-down resistors need to be to attenuate the amplitude of that signal so that it's the correct video standard, and also that it's that it'll get along with 75 ohm source termination, because it's important not only that you correct the amplitude of the signal, but that on your television end it agrees with it and sort of sees it as a 75 ohm input. There's kind of two different things at play there, but that's what they did, and it's very simple. Nobody ever did it before, but they figured it out and they did it, and I think the picture's outstanding now.
Yeah. So I just took I think I took a one chip 01 and a one chip 03, and all I did was add the correct resistors to each, and I mean we're talking just 3 resistors, and it was a noticeable difference. Not right. And the brightness, whatever. I mean, if you're in a bright room, you won't even notice the difference. It was the clarity that I did notice. And the one thing that I always found weird that I never really had time to dig into it was, why do one chip 1, 2, and 3 revisions look a little different each? It is my assumption that if I found one that looked really bad, it would probably be bad caps, wear and tear. But good conditions, they look a little different, and the Mini looks a little different. But if you do things like, if you take the RGB out directly from the chip, just like the RGB bypass mods, and you add the same chip to a Mini as you do a one chip, it looks pretty identical. And on top of that, if you were to bypass it with its own amp, I think I might have just inceptioned my one chip, but if you take the RGB out directly from the sRGB chip, sever the connection, usually just by removing the resistors, and hooking it up with the correct circuit, you get a better signal than what's on board. So have you ever figured out what that was? Is there just noise on the motherboard that's creating something? Is it not the right components altogether?
So what we know, just based on what you said, from the process of elimination, is all one chips. I might be wrong on this, but I believe all one chips use the same one chip revision.
SCPUN chip, yeah.
Okay. Are there revisions to that, or is it the same across the board? Do you know?
I don't think there are revisions.
It doesn't make any difference, because the fact that you're installing a parasite device The parasite device being something foreign to the board, i.e., an RGB driver like a 7314 or 7374. You're saying that regardless of how they look, how the picture quality differences the picture quality differences are between the one chip revisions with the onboard stuff. If you throw that shit off of there and you put if you put a bypass board on there, it's virtually the same across the board. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, so what that tells you is, two possibilities, and really only two possibilities: board routing, poor or inadequate routing of the main board itself, or there's some discrete difference. The discretes are different, or the components, some discrete components.
Mm-hmm.
There might be differences in their values or where they even are on the board. Like the Genesis, and I'm sorry, this is totally irrelevant, but the Genesis is plagued by horrible video shit. Gel bars, coupling all over the place on the Genesis. And that's mainly due to two things: poor board routing that varies from revision to revision, and also in a lot of the revisions, especially the earlier stuff, they put their RGB routes really close to a lot of high-speed stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like the subcarrier, the clock crystal that drives the color burst, or the color carrier. God, I'm having a brain dump. The subcarrier, yeah, it's all the same, but it drives it's the frequency for the NTSC color burst output. Mm-hmm. That's really close to those RGB outputs that go to the inputs of the 11 the whatever encoders on there. It causes horrible problems. So
jail bars is the most common.
Jail bars is the most prominent problem of them all, but I don't want to just jump over to the Genesis and brush off the SNES stuff.
That's actually a perfect transition.
I mentioned the Genesis stuff because the one-chip problems, they all go away when you use a foreign device to drive RGB.
Right.
The Genesis, all those problems go away when you pull stuff off the board and you route it differently.
So
it's the same
you
principle.
have a board for that now as well, right?
I do. It's called the Sega Mega Video. It pulls all those signals that couple off of the board of any revision. Mm-hmm. It goes through a bunch of discretes, mm-hmm. Based on if it's for a master system or for a Genesis, and then they output to the encoder, and then from there you're off to the races. It does everything. The only thing that this board does is it totally 100% corrects the coupling. Mm-hmm. The AC coupling and the RGB inputs and the subcarrier input, and a little bit in the sync input, and it's a beautiful clear. I think I sent you some screenshots of some in-game pictures, but it beautifully clears up the gel bars and any coupling noise that's in your picture, while maintaining all of your encoded video. So you can have a beautiful S-video picture, a really shitty composite picture. All those are left intact, so you're not bypassing anything with that.
Gotcha. Yeah. So basically, you're lifting certain pins on the output chip or removing resistors to do the same thing, and then moving everything away. Do you need shielded cable for that? Is it just It's
always best to use shielded cable when you can. Like you could use CD-ROM audio cables. Those are well shielded. You could use just about anything that's got a good shield on it. Is it necessary? No. Does it help? Yeah, it can. The board is well insulated, and the routes. When you take these signals out of circuit off the board and you route them through my little rig, you're pretty much eliminating 95% of the crosstalk and noise in the coupling that plagues those signals while they're on the board. So it's not totally necessary, but it's a good practice to do.
Gotcha. And this leaves everything intact. And this is so there's actually two things for the Genesis coming out. And I think not to talk about somebody else's stuff with you on here, but I think there's a home for both of them. And I think the one that you're coming out with, I could think of a million uses for it. And there's also another bypass coming out, and that one removes composite video in most cases, and there's other reasons for it. But much like the two SNES boards, the one that uses the onboard encoder and the separate one, I definitely see a need for both, and I really can't wait to start testing both of these things because there's so many different scenarios people find themselves in, and more importantly, there are so many revision motherboards on both Genesis and Master System, and it's kind of maddening trying to keep up with everything and to figure out which one's which, and hopefully between all of us that are testing these things, we can get a list together to suggest the best for each person's situation.
Right. Right. Well, the Genesis, the Master System, the RGB outputs, the signal characteristics of each of those, they're very close to being similar. They come out pretty hot, so you have to attenuate those and bring those down. If you want to put those in an encoder, especially if you want to use like a Texas Instruments driver, like a 70, like a 14 or 74, I believe that's what we said we were going to refer to them as from now on. But like the Genesis has, there's like some 5K6 pull-ups on the RGB inputs to keep it from drooping because the signal variation. But some really subtle things. It's really easy to make a nice, effective RGB bypass board, and I have no problems with those. I think they work very, very well. My solution is just more of a purist solution. That if you enjoy the crispness of the native RGB output, but you just want to remove the gel bars, and also if you want to keep intact your composite and your modded S video outputs, that's what that's for. But I have no problem with the RGB bypass boards. They do just that. They bypass the nasty coupled RGB routes, and they just pull it off the VDP and terminate it to the DIN connector. I think they're fine.
Cool.
Yeah, that's right.
So the other thing that you were working on is another updated basic board for the N64. So people have been getting confused about this as well. So there are two, to break it down, there are two types of RGB mods you could do for an N64.
Right.
Tim Worthington, the same guy that did the NES RGB and the Atari 2600 RGB, he has a board that can be installed in any N64, and
right.
that's got logic on it. You could update the firmware on it to do some deblur stuff. It's a pretty cool thing. It's a little more it's not expensive, but it's a little more expensive than the basic ones are. And then you have the basic boards, where you could take the first 4 motherboard revision N64s. It's generally anyone with an NS1 serial number, at least in America.
That's right.
And it already has RGB on the board. It's just not amplified. So you essentially just take RGB, amp it, stick it to the multi-out. And up until now, there's been a bunch of 73 or the 14 solutions, which I think the reason those things were predominantly the wave of those do-it-yourself boards is because anybody could really be patient and make their own.
Right.
But the 74 boards, I mean, you need skills to solder that board by hand. No beginner is going to be doing that on the first try.
Right.
So now that people are able to do that, and people are making more boards, that's the one that I thought, and I know a few people are making 74 base boards for the N64, but I liked your spin on it. It was pretty cool. So it installs the same way that the older boards did, right over the multi-out. Same, very easy. Just pull RGB right off the board, solder it on. But
I have one here I can show you.
Yeah, show it off.
If I can get it to focus, but it's a really simple thing. Let me see if I can get that to. Oh, come on, baby. That's about as good as I can get it, but it's a very simple, it's a very subtle solution. You have your 73, 74 on board. That's a good enough shot, I guess. That's about as good as I'm going to get it. But you have your 73, 74 on board with all that nasty low pass filtering hardwired off, so you get a very clear picture. In my opinion, a lot of people, I just say in my opinion, the 73, 74, and I think you agree with this, it produces a much sharper picture than the 73, 14, or at least it can.
Yes.
It can certainly, but you have that on there, and then you also have, which I've never seen before, really done properly, is a 1881 sync stripper. Yeah. If you need TTLC sync, or you can terminate it so that it'll work with 75 ohm inputs. It's on board, whether you need it or not. So if you have a CPU 03, which typically all of those N64 revisions have C-Sync already to the multi-out, uh, you can leave it be. You don't have to do anything, and you can just use it. The C-Sync provided by the main board itself. But if you have a CPU 04 and it doesn't have if it doesn't have C-Sync to the multi-out, there's a little jumper on here. You just take a little blob of solder, you jump that, you short 2 pads, and you've got C-Sync right there coming off the multi-out, all generated by the board. So it's
So this
it's
was a pretty big deal for me because, I've tested this unfortunately a lot, and a lot of the board revisions 1, 2, and 3, you plug those into a Sony PVM with an RGB cable that gets C-Sync from the correct pin. It works fine, works absolutely perfect. You
right.
plug that same thing into certain switches and certain processors, and it won't
Nothing.
work,
Right.
even though
Right.
it does technically have sync. So on that board, I'll show pictures, but on that board, if you just look at where the sync pin is, pin 3, you'll see the lines going to just a little surface mount resistor. And it's the easiest thing. You just take your soldering iron and run it across the side of that, take some tweezers and pull that right off. You could remove C-Sync going to that multi-out. So even if you have revision 1, 2, or 3 of those boards, in revision 4, if you look, there actually isn't even a resistor there at all. It doesn't go to
Right.
anything. So
Right.
just by doing that, then you jump the jumper on your board, and now you've solved that issue. But that also solves another issue in that a lot of people were just saying, well, I don't want to deal with it. I'll just get a sync on composite. And they were getting pretty bad crosshatch patterns from the interference.
Terrible
So by
coupling.
putting the sync stripper at the console level, it completely removes that as an issue.
Right. And again, that comes back to what we were talking about earlier. People, I don't know if I mentioned it. I don't know if I mentioned this directly, but people initially, or in the very beginning, where the thinking was, or I guess the consensus was, well, if you put the sync stripper in the SCART hood, that'll take care of any if you're having coupling in your composite output. If you're syncing on composite video, well, putting the sync stripper in the SCART hood will eliminate most of those coupling issues, the checkerboarding, the cross-hatching. No. I mean, what's the point of putting? There's no point in putting the C-Sync, putting a sync stripper in the SCART hood, if your goal is to sort of deal with the coupling.
To eliminate interference. So if you
because-
have a signal that's perfectly clear, there's nothing wrong with it, but you just have a piece of equipment that requires C-Sync.
TTL C-Sync, yes.
Yep.
It's fine to put it in the SCART hood.
That
If
works
you have-
perfect. Just solder
you
that
have-
sucker right in. But
Correct.
interference is the issue. Making sure that the signal that's traveling up that cable doesn't interfere with the other signals in that cable. That's when you need that sync stripper on the console level. And
Right.
I've built them in before. I've done there's not much room down there, so you have to carefully mount something. And I don't care how good you are, you can't make it look that pretty if you have all these little things that are all stuck to it. And it's worked fine, but just having this one solution, 3 wires.
Well, you installed it. What did you think about it when you installed it?
Simple, basic, simple. It worked and looked great. N64, I thought the picture quality looked great. And I did test it with a few pieces of equipment I have that are very, very sensitive to what sync you send through it. And
Right.
just, worked perfect. There's no
Good.
issues whatsoever.
Excellent. Well, yeah. I mean, if you have some coupling issues, or if you have some checkerboarding or crosshatch patterns, put that sync stripper on the console end, because if you put it on the SCART hood, that the noise off the chroma typically is what couples in that frequency. But that it's already coupled all through the cable, so it does no good. It's already in there. But I just wanted to say that. Just wanted to say that,
makes
Bob.
sense.
Just wanted to say that.
So let me see if make sure we got everything here so far. So we got we talked about, we got to come up with a better name for it, but the basic SNES mini board. So for the people that want to use the onboard encoder, pulls S video and RGB. Do you know how much you're going to be selling that for? Do you have a price for that yet?
Less than $15, probably $14 or $15 at the very most.
Cool. So that's perfect. So that's the one that if people just want a basic one, or a lot of these eBay sellers that, just buy this cheap board. At the end of the day, when you buy a bunch of those resistors and you have to pay for DigiKey shipping or something, you're probably not saving much, and it is a lot of effort saved.
Do you know
So,
what I love though? That's been happening lately, and I think that I and a bunch of other people have really what's happened is a result of sort of our behavior. A lot of people now, when they buy something, especially on eBay, and I've noticed this because I've heard a lot about it. If they're buying an RGB modded Super Nintendo, if they're buying an RGB modded, if they're buying something that's been modified, they will request for pictures to be taken and sent to them. They want to see. People are now starting to ask when they spend
yep,
$200 or $150 on something. They want to see the craftsmanship or the mod work that was employed
yep.
for it.
See, the
And
very few times I've sold consoles on eBay, because I never modded for sale. I modded for me or for testing, and then if I ended up with 5 Super Nintendos, I got to sell
just
them
get
and
rid of
test the
them.
next one. I
Sure.
would actually, not only would I put pictures, detailed pictures of everything, I would always make sure to put in the description, these are pictures of the actual console you're going to be purchasing. These aren't
Right.
generic pictures. So even
Right.
though my mod work's I've never been in the top 10, it doesn't suck, and it's certainly not covered in a pile of glue with resistors barely being held on. So, yeah,
Well,
yeah, definitely. I love that. I love people are asking for that. It really
people are
helps
at
everybody.
it helps it helps the whole scene altogether. And when people ask for that, do you really want to show them you know do you want to show them pictures of a bunch of wires that have a bunch of components just sloppily well, I see that. I mean, I'm not saying everybody does that, but 9 times out of 10 when I see one of these things being sold and there's pictures,
Hmm.
there the components, the caps and the resistors and everything are just sloppily soldered onto these little wires, these little 30 og wires, like Kynar wire. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. And you could probably not only is there less of a chance of something breaking and shipping, or something coming off in shipping when you shake it a little bit,
Hmm.
but you might get a little more money out of your system if you use
Right.
proper shit.
When I just recently updated the guide for that do-it-yourself with just your pile of resistors mod, I spent
Right.
so much time trying to make it look as good as possible, just because I really wanted to show as best of an example as I could, just to kind of show these guys on eBay, like, this is, you could make it look better for not that much more effort. And
Right.
I don't think it looks good. I know it's functional. You could freaking pick up the Mini, buy every one of those solder joints. It's solid and it's good work, but
Right.
it just doesn't look nice. And when you have just one nice little, it looks like a factory made board and just a couple wires, it makes such a big difference. So I really
It
hope people
does.
start using these things. But so
It
we got
does.
that. We got your other SNES board with the 74 chip on it, and I think I forgot to mention, you did add the components for S-Video. So if you have a SNES Mini, you install just, like I said, the very easy 4 wires from the bottom of the board, RGB and sync to yours, and that's it. But if you do want S-Video capabilities, you could pop the shielding off and solder directly to the chip on top as well. I mean, I don't really see a need for S-Video anymore, but I'm sure there's a scenario where people need it. So beautiful, just as easy. We got the N64 board that has the updated chip and the sync stripper. That's pretty awesome. Do you have prices for and availability for either of those yet, or are they coming soon?
If you want one now, if anybody wants one of those right now, email me. I don't really have prices set.
Hmm.
I've got some stock. I've accumulated some stock, but probably within the next week to 2 weeks at the very most, those will be available on my online store. Or like I said, just email me and I'll be happy to get you
Gotcha.
one.
And now, do you have them configured for the one chip? The fat SNES, if you will. Do you have the same SNES mini board, but just configured with the different resistors for that?
That's correct. If you order one, if you have a one chip, it's to you. It's by your discretion if you want the 750 ohm resistors for the fat one chip, or
Hmm.
if you want the 1.2K pull downs for the SNES Mini. So it doesn't matter if you. It'll work for both. Just tell me which one you want it for.
Gotcha. Because a lot of people that end up with the one chip O3s, they go and they add the one little jumper wire for C-Sync. And it's my opinion, and I'm sure a ton of people are going to disagree, but you're going to open up a rare, expensive console. You're going to take it all apart, and you're going to solder a little wire on it. At that point, why not just add a chip with a bypass on it? Because
Right.
you will get a little bit of an improvement. Maybe you won't notice it, maybe you will, I don't know. But there's so much that can go wrong on these boards, and a lot of people don't seem to remember that Nintendo sold like 47 million of them or something.
Yeah,
So
a lot.
if they're looking at components and they're saying, well, we could save, 85 cents per system if we just use a different grade component that no one's
Shit
gonna
adds
notice.
up, man.
That adds up to millions of dollars. And
Yeah.
in their defense, nobody would have noticed in the 90s. Not
Right.
unless you had at the time a $5,000 to $10,000 monitor. No one would have noticed. I'm not faulting them for it, but nowadays, you order a bunch of components off of DigiKey, it's a whole new wave of electronics. You can get 1% tolerant resistors for pretty much the same price as everything else. So you're going to get better components. You're going to get newer stuff. You don't have to worry about a lot of the older components. So it's my opinion, which, once again, I'm sure a lot of people are going to disagree, that if you're going to pop a console open just to do the C-Sync thing, why not just get a better upgrade altogether for what's essentially, not too much money.
And and that kind of segues into something else that I kind of touch on really quick. People get really anal, and people are really picky and particular about the precision of audio and video, which I totally understand.
Yes.
But the majority of these people are using consumer grade television sets or even a consumer grade monitor solution. I'm sure those fuckers have 5% tolerance, 75 ohm pull downs, with a bunch of other stuff. That it doesn't matter. There's always going to be a tiny bit of wiggle room, and that tiny bit of wiggle room, I guarantee that you wouldn't see visually. I would be impressed if you could see the difference between the two,
Right.
by these these tiny little nuances.
Yeah, when I tested a bunch of consumer grade TVs, and while they looked great, I mean, if you get a good signal to them, they're good quality. They're great for people starting out. Hey, do I really want to get back into retro gaming? Is this just a fad that I want to play Super Nintendo like I did when I was a kid, or
Right.
do I really enjoy it? Yeah, go
Right.
to Goodwill. Spend $5
Absolutely.
and get yourself a nice one, and don't
Listen,
go crazy with all this.
I have a 36-inch RGB modified Trinitron, and I love it.
I'm
you
sure
go.
for that size. The one thing I'll say is, most of the time, I would prefer the highest quality screen. So for many of us, that means you're playing on a 20-inch PVM. But light gun games and the Sega Master System 3D games give me the biggest screen you got. I don't care if I lose quality. I don't care if I'm playing on composite. I want to, sit across the room and shoot ducks with Duck Hunt.
Well, it doesn't have the line count of a broadcast monitor, but it has a very nice aperture grill. It has some very nice screen calibration features.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as much as I would like to, I got rid of all the. I only work on them now. I don't own them.
Mm-hmm.
But a 20-inch PVM or BVM, how much in today's market? How much do those go for?
It's pushing 300 now, minimum.
Okay. $300 for a 20-year-old, 15-year-old CRT versus $15 for a 36-inch Trinitron aperture grilled tube CRT that does RGB. The quality difference, yes, certainly there's going to be differences, but my goodness, I'll stick to that thing and enjoy the size because I hate to tell you this, Bob, size does matter.
Well, agreed. I was lucky enough to get one of those 32-inch BVMs, which is just, I talked about it a little bit a few weeks ago on a podcast, but it's a lot of work, right? You don't just turn it on and it starts working. You always have to make sure everything's set right and for each console. But for me, it's worth it because I really do. I mean, I really love playing these. It's clearly, if I'm years into this website, this isn't a quick nostalgia grab. I really do enjoy this stuff. So
Sure, absolutely, I do too. I love it. I love everything about it.
yeah. So you have a few other things on the horizon as well, and I think the TurboGrafx 16 one, right?
So I've got a bunch of things going for the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine and the all of that stuff. I was looking for one here. I usually have a bunch of this stuff out. I'll show you a few of them if I can. 7374 based RGB amps that are properly attenuated, much like the Super Nintendo, for the higher gain or the higher the signal load of the PC Engine. Very simple. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, there it went.
Technical difficulties.
It
Man
went.
down, man down.
There it went.
Well, while you're getting that back set back up, I'll just give a quick rundown. So, right now, if you have a TurboGrafx 16 or a PC Engine, you could plug right in the back of it. There's a couple of different solutions. I have some strong opinions about some, but one I'm happy to tell about right now is the DB Electronics. I think he calls it the graphics booster. Is a great solution. Plug it in the back, works fine. It's properly attenuated. Requires a Genesis tube RGB cable with the proper components in it. And that's great, but that doesn't allow you to use the Super CD-ROM, which I think most people probably wouldn't care about. But then what do you do when you have a Duo? Or what if you want an internal mod? And at the moment, Tim's AV driver is a pretty good solution. But there's certain things, it's just a board. You have to find a place to mount it. And you've come up with one that goes right on the pins, right?
I came up with two boards, Barbara, two boards. This board here, I don't know if that'll zoom, but I'll try to get that in there for you. Oh, come on, girl.
Yeah, it's good enough. I think people would understand it. On the lower left of the shorter part of the L or Tetris block, depending on how you'd like to look at it, that's the one that goes over the pins itself, right?
Well, quite simply, if you have just a few seconds to spare, I will show you. I'll show you what this looks like. I have both a RGB mod, and I have a video driver. The board on top is the audio. I'm not video driver. I have an audio driver that has a gain of 3. So what happens is it takes the line leveled. It's not really line level, but the real low leveled audio of the PC Engine. It makes it really loud and juicy and delicious. And of course, the RGB board just outputs a nice 0.69 to 0.7 volt peak-to-peak volt RGB output with C-Sync. There's buffered C-Sync on there too.
So
a lot of boards don't do
C-Sync
that.
output. Yeah, a lot of the mods for the TurboGrafx 16 don't take that into account.
It does take that into account, and also precisely the same circuit, only a different footprint. There's a board for the. There is a. This isn't even a complete board, but there's a board for the.
The Duos.
The Turbo Duo, the Turbo Duo, and all of that. So yeah, some pretty good stuff. I've got a bunch of those out to a couple friends. A bunch of those. I've got a couple of those out to a couple friends, and they've compared it to some of the older solutions, and they really like it. They really like the clarity, the sharpness, and the just the picture quality with the 7374, and the sound's badass too.
Yeah, I'll be working with Wes from Second Opinion Games, probably late November or early December, and we're just gonna turn his basement into a mini lab for a day, and I want to test on. Well, first I want to take a TurboGrafx and do all the jail bar fixes to make sure that it's clean, and then I want to test all the solutions out there. And I have an assumption on what I'm going to find, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. I'll wait and I'll definitely put it up there. But I have a feeling that the 73, 74 based boards are probably going to be up on the top of the list. Same thing with DB Electronics and the AV driver. That's my guess, I think, is that they're going to be all pretty darn close.
I love the 7374 across the board. I think it's it's just excellent that you can turn off, and I understand why the 7314, I understand why it has that low pass filter hardwired. I know what they were trying to do due to signal degradation and sort of other things like that, some artifacting, whatever. It's just to smooth, they did that to smooth it out. To take any rough edges off the signal. I don't give a fuck about that. I want to see those bastards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see it. I'll decide if I want to take it off or not, or if I want to turn that blur shit on. So 73, 70, the 74. You can turn that off, and guess what? There are people. I've seen people who say that it's too sharp for them. That it's too sharp. Like, my God, if they're saying it's too sharp, it must be really awesome.
Generally speaking, those are always also the same people that say they prefer a lower consumer grade monitor over an RGB monitor because it doesn't
Correct.
look like it did when they were kids.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that's another reason why I know this isn't a nostalgia grab for me, is because I don't really give a shit how it looked when I was a kid. I want to play the best. I want it to look the best. I don't. When I say the best, I guess the proper way to say it is, if I'm playing a game, I don't want to be distracted by artifacts. I want to be playing the
Correct.
game and just enjoy the game. So.
Right. I understand.
One thing you just mentioned, though, you said you had the audio board. You want to talk a little bit more about that? Is that something that people should be worrying about in all their TurboGrafx 16s or PC Engines? Is it just the Duos, just the others?
It's not really. Yes and no. The audio level off the TurboGrafx and off of the PC Engine, the original ones, the white PC Engine and the TurboGrafx, there is a audio driver there for the mono, because natively that's all they output. But the stereo outputs, they're pseudo line level, so you can't hook them up directly, but you're going to have to turn the volume up a little bit on your set in order to hear them. To at least a level that I find acceptable. So what the board does, and actually Kevtris, good old Kev, who's a good friend of mine, very nice person, he's a champion in life, helped me design this. He pretty much designed everything on this.
Oh,
and
cool.
and this is all Kevin. And I asked him just a bunch of questions, and I played with some values myself here because it needed it. I mean, the TurboGrafx and the PC Engine really benefit from an audio driver. And I wanted something that could be somewhat adjusted if you wanted to adjust it. But for the most part, other than a couple of resistors that you can change, the gain setting resistors, that circuit is basically designed for 2 decibel or 3 decibel. So that means a gain of you can either double or you can triple the audio level output. And I think the double is actually pretty good. But like I said, if you want to change it, you can. But
so for people with well, I guess Duos, you have to add your own anyway. But I guess the thing that I was doing with the TurboGrafx 16s is removing the RF, because as much as I really decided that I don't want to cut plastic unless I absolutely have to, I want to leave the plastic, which is, irreversible changes. That's the one thing I could not give a shit about. I'd throw that RF thing right in the garbage. I'm never going to use it again. I don't care about it. And that's actually the perfect size hole to mount like either to some kind of, 8 or 9 pin DIN in there. So I'd been doing it because all of my consoles I use for testing, so I don't do any permanent things anyway. I do the dreaded glue on the side just to hold the port in.
Right, yeah, you sicko.
But I mean, for that use, it's actually perfect, because if you hot glue something in, all you have to do is snap the glue right off, and it's not very sturdy, but I don't need it to be. I just need it for testing. But for the people that do want one, didn't you have a cool little trick that you were talking about a while back on how to mount in that RF area?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not really my trick, but it's something that I use and I do, and it's very effective. If you're using a TurboGrafx, or if you're modifying a TurboGrafx or the original PC Engine, and you want to add RGB and stereo audio by use of a Mini DIN 9. I would recommend using the Mini DIN 9 connector, because that's the same connector that's in the Genesis Model 2. So that means that you can just buy Model 2 Genesis SCART cables, or even a composite AV cable if you just wanted to get compass shit out of it. And there you go. But you buy that cable, or you buy that connector, that female panel or that female PCB mount connector. It's got a metal shield around the housing that scrape away some of the solder resist from where the RF modulator was, scrape some of that solder resist away, and solder the housing, the Mini DIN 9 housing, to the board all the way around, and you've got a nice mechanically bonded connection between the DIN 9 and the board, and that son of a bitch isn't going anywhere, in my opinion.
So that's when you take the whole RF box out, underneath that ground plane that's there, that's what you're talking about?
That's right. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
So you basically just score it up a little bit just to make sure that there's no residue or anything on there, or any of the board stuff. You'd probably have to heat up your soldering gun quite a lot. Use a flat tip, not a thin tip, and then tin it. And then
I was actually looking one here. I can kind of sort of walk you through what I'm talking about. It only takes about a couple of seconds, but this is a PC Engine board, and the let's see if this is coming through. Yeah, it is. The RF modulator that was here has been removed.
Right.
And so what you would want to do is just take like an X-Acto knife or anything and just delicately, where my fingers, just start scraping away the solder resist. All this green under here, that's all ground flooded. That's just a big ground plane. So just scrape this away and put your connector, and make sure your connector's lined up in the correct area so it meets the hole on the casing correctly, and scrape that away and solder it down in that position, and you've got an excellent mechanical connection between the connector and that, and also you have a really sturdy ground, so your ground's taken care of.
That's a good idea. I like that a lot. And always having good ground is always helpful. So that kills two birds with one stone. So
it's
I like
important.
That. So that's cool. So you just hook both the audio and the video up right to that. Use the Genesis 2 connector and be done with it.
Right, but it's something important to know. And I won't get into the details of it because it's kind of a lot to explain. But I might have mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the PC Engine, much like the one-chip Super Nintendo, it's a lot hotter of a. There's a lot. The analog outputs are a lot hotter than the standard 0.7 peak-to-peak voltage signal that's across the board. I correct that on the board with attenuation on the outputs. If you buy a Model 2 connector with my board, or maybe with even a lot of other boards, I've not really investigated them. But make sure the Model 2 SCART cable that you buy has no passive components in it, no capacitors or resistors, or it'll fuck up the whole signal. It'll fuck up the signal load altogether. So just
that's actually a big deal because so that's what happened with the DB graphics booster, is that the SCART cable, the SCART spec cables for the Genesis consoles, you're supposed to have 75 ohm resistors on the console side of it. And then in the SCART head, you're supposed to have 220 UF capacitors.
That's right.
So there was two cable sellers, and one made them to that spec, and the other one bought a couple of official Sega cables, and then just did exactly what Sega did, and Sega did not include the capacitors. So if you bought those cables and you used it with the DB graphics booster, it would not work right at all in most cases.
Right.
So that's why I'm trying to get people to stray away from using that Genesis cable unless they know for a fact that they need that exact combination of the
man, I don't mean to be an asshole, but the simple solution to that would be to just build the fucking cable correctly, and let's not even worry about this. I think we were kind of talking about that earlier, about are the cable manufacturers following best, I won't say what's the correct standard, but best practices when creating these cables.
That's
it's really
a hard
important
thing for them to deal with because, do they make cables for everybody's individual solution, to do that, they would have to double in price in order to be able to do that. Do they find a happy medium? It would be my opinion, as a layman and somebody that doesn't know any of the deep electrical terms of it, is, you just look up what the Genesis spec's supposed to be and you make it to that. And if anybody else has an issue with their setup, they have to deal with it individually.
The problem with the Genesis is that Sega fucked it up. Sega themselves fucked it all up. Just look at the French. Have you ever looked at the French Sega Genesis? There is no video.
Pictures.
There is no video encoder. All of the components are in the cable, and it's an RGB only system for one thing, and all of those components are in the RGB cable itself.
I have seen that. Yeah, that's
and
crazy.
So Sega fucked up their standard, and rather than fixing it, they did it across the board everywhere. So that's why you have your resistors and your capacitor. You have your components on the cable end, at least you should, because those components don't exist anywhere on the motherboard on the console side, and it screwed everything up.
Right.
And that's technically the way it's supposed to be done, and that's why I said best practice before, because best practice isn't putting the capacitors, the offset caps. It doesn't make any difference, but the resistors need to be as close to the console as they can be. Do you know, or did you just answer this and was I not paying attention, if cable manufacturers are putting at least the resistors in the plug end on the console end of the cable?
As far as I know, the two main cable suppliers are definitely putting the 75 ohm resistors on the console side of the cable. I think
I've got
have switched over to putting in the caps and the SCART head as well. Do you have one that
I ha-
doesn't do that?
I have a it's
Because
not
a
here in
lot of the
front of me,
ones
but
that came from like Hong Kong or China didn't have any actually, or they were
I
just
have
kind of
a
jammed in the SCART head.
if it, I don't want to leave like 3 seconds of airtime here to go get it real quick, but I have a cable from. Well, hold on a second, Bob. Just play some music real quick.
Well, if you can still hear me while you're going to do it, you want to
Oh, I
answer a
can hear you.
question then?
I can answer all of your questions, Bob. I'm a question master.
So for your board, then you're saying regardless of what connector you use, there should be no components in that cable at all, right?
There should be no components in the cable whatsoever.
That's why I think I want to start trying to use the same DIN connector that's used in the XRGB Mini. And the only reason I would choose that one at all is because I believe both cable manufacturers already stock and make those SCART cables. And
Right.
on top of it, nobody puts any components in them because you don't need to. So that way, as long as you could find, like on DigiKey or Mouser, if you could find both the the circular ones and the surface mount ones, panel mount and surface mount, I think they're called.
Right.
You could recommend those to people, and there's never again going to be a confusion about this. You never have to worry about, well, is it Genesis spec? Is it Genesis 2? Is it Sega? You just buy a cable that's just wires on, wires in the middle, and that's it. And both cable sellers too offer them, and depending what console you're using, some are shielded better than others. So I feel like that might be a good idea. I just haven't really started to find the receptors yet. Do you know off the top of your head if you can get something like that from DigiKey or Mouser for the that spec?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know, Bob, and I really don't know where the hell this cable is. So I can't show it off to you. So I'll come back to the camera so you can see my face again. But I don't even know what the hell you just said, Bob. What the hell? What were you What were you talking about just now? I was in my own world.
The mini DIN that's used in the FrameMeister.
Right. The Mini DIN 8. Correct.
Can you buy those both surface mount and panel mount from DigiKey?
Oh, sure. I mean, you can get them a lot cheaper from the Shenzhen market. Just go to eBay or go to AliExpress, and you can buy.
If you could send some links to that would be really helpful, because I think
Absolutely.
people and even you too for your modding services as well, right? I mean, if you were to just email any of the cable manufacturers and say, I need 10 of the FrameMeister SCART cables to package with them, that's something that they could probably pull off their shelf and send to you. Whereas
Listen,
if you
Bob,
said, I have this custom connector, can you make a cable for it? They don't have time for that. They probably wouldn't do it.
Well, for one thing, I roll my own cables, and for another, secondly, I have hundreds of Mini DIN 8 and Mini DIN 9 and full-size DIN connectors here that I use for the mods. But you can, to answer your question, yes, you can get those connectors that you just cited in great volume, and they are ridiculously inexpensive. They're really good. They're really good. I use them.
If you could send me links for those, I'll put them in the video description for people that want them, because it's even at the point now where I have a few consoles that are modded with the Genesis 2 style connector, and I would like to remove those and put in just something I don't even have to worry about using the wrong cable anymore.
Well, weren't you using for your test stuff VGA cables or VGA connectors?
I was for a long time, because I was also using a 10 16 port VGA switch, and it was absolutely awesome. It was great. It wasn't auto switch, but you just push one button and it went to whatever console was on.
Right.
But the main problem I had with that is, and this is gonna sound dumb, but when you cut that hole, I mean, it's not a quick thing. Whereas if you just drill a hole to put a circular mini DIN through it, you just drill a hole and it's already circular. You put it right in, you mount it, you're good to go. Those VGA connectors were a royal pain to mount in certain places, and they're obviously a lot bigger than a circular mini DIN connector. So
I understand what you're saying, and yes, I absolutely agree with you. Drilling a hole is a lot easier than doing real casework, and that's the problem with adding multi-outs in general, like the SNES or the Nintendo multi-out to consoles. That you want to have, you want to use a standard Nintendo RGB cable. Or S-video cables, or whatever kind of multi-out cable with an NES, or a lot of people even use them for other things like twin Famicoms and PC engines. I've even seen people put a Nintendo multi-out in a PC engine, and I do a lot of those. I've probably installed over 50 high def boards for people
Yeah.
since the high def was going in. The HDMI port, unless you have a proper template, God, that's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
That's a huge pain in the ass. So I always like drilling holes more than anything. But this is a I don't know how old this is, and but they're from UK. They're from the UK land. Is
Yep.
that showing up at all?
Yep, that's the Retro Gaming Cables UK sticker on it. Yep.
Okay. I opened this thing up because I was going to use this cable. I was going to use this cable to test to strip it out so I could use it to test some PC Engine stuff I was working on. And all of the components, I removed the heat shrink. You can see the heat shrink on those lines where there were no capacitors, but there were resistors. The resistors were heat shrunk, and they were soldered to the cups
Were
of the
they
SCART
75 ohm
connector.
resistors?
They were yes, these were 75 ohm resistors.
Jeez. Okay. I wonder if he's still doing it that way, because I have a cable from him. I just recently bought, and I'm pretty sure that it's in the console end.
Okay, I didn't know. I mean, it's a good cable. It's not shielded, but I don't think it's shielded. This cable's not shielded.
What's your opinion on that? Because I started to get really curious, and I bought all of my cables are unshielded, and then I bought a second for Super Nintendo and Genesis 2 that were shielded. The only thing that I did notice a difference is in Genesis, whenever there's a white screen, there's a really loud buzz, and with the shielded cable, it's not as loud of a buzz.
That's a result of that's horrible. That's coupling in the cable, and the audio is awful for that in the Genesis. When there's a when there's like a peak load or a high load in the audio and the video output, and it's at its peak, it's like peak luminosity, and you have and it couples into the audio cables, and you'll get that zzz, and then it'll go away. It's terrible. Shielded cables will help with that. More specifically, you can do there are a couple different trains of thought. I think that having just a nice, well-grounded with drain wire terminated on each end, multi-conductor cable that's shielded, I think that's just fine. If you really want to get away from that stuff, you can get cable that each conductor is shielded in itself.
I've seen that on DigiKey, and it's expensive.
It's very
really
expensive. Really, if you have a good shielded cable and you're using a proper gauge conductor for your signals, just one shield for a multi-conductor cable is fine. The noise floor between that and a cable with each conductor is individually shielded. To me, in my opinion, it's going to be negligible if your cable is already a good cable to begin with.
Gotcha.
But if you're really an audiophile and you're really just a pain in my ass, buy that fucking cable and don't ever talk to me again. But that became really popular. Coax.
Yep.
Coaxial cable, which is a 75 coax is 75 ohm loaded cable, that became really popular where people started to make RGB cables, SCART cables out of multi-conductor. God, that shit must be a pain in the ass to bend around and to articulate.
It is,
but it was multi-conductor coaxial cable that was shielded. That would have to yield the best results of anything. But I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's necessary at all.
Yeah, I have one for the Super Nintendo and for the Genesis, and I've tried both, and I, at first glance, couldn't really notice a difference. But then again, I never had a complaint about the signal for any of those. It was really just the Genesis audio buzz was the only thing. But
well, it's really simple. I mean, a lot of people who, if people really want to investigate that, just turn your damn scope on, compare a cable to another cable, look for ringing and some jumping, and I guarantee that you won't find very much. At least not very much that's in the frequency that would be audible to humans. If you have a good cable to begin with, that's the key. It's more or less you have a shitty cable to start with. Never mind the shielding, you just have a shitty cable, or you have some shitty signals that are coupling into that cable. So if you deal with that 7, 8 times out of 10, a lot of those noise issues will go away. But shielding is, I still think it's important. Absolutely.
So I think we pretty much covered everything. Was there anything else that you had coming out with that I forgot to talk about? I mean, you're always working on stuff, so that's kind of an unfair question. But I mean, do you have something within the
Yeah, I've
next
got a lot of
month?
stuff. I've got a lot of stuff I'm working on that I can't talk about just yet. But I
Within
do
the
have.
next month, I guess, something reasonable, because we certainly covered a lot. We certainly didn't leave anybody without potential toys to buy here. So
I've got a few. I have a few things coming out that deal with RGBS, RGB, and composite sync to VGA inputs
oh, cool.
uh, for monitors that we kind of talked about this the other day. Monitors that do support LCD monitors, like one of these maybe, that support 15 kilohertz. 15 kilohertz RGB video,
Hmm.
and they also treat 240p as a progressive signal, and they don't interlace it as 480i. If you can get one of those, if you can get a display that does that, it can yield a really nice picture quality. The problem is some of those sets, or some of those panels, they want horizontal and vertical sync to be separated, and they want it in an VGA standard. So you've got
Right.
in VGA land, you have RGB, all of your grounds, and you have horizontal and vertical sync. So some monitors don't care if you can throw composite sync to the horizontal input, and it'll sync just fine. Others won't. So I've come up with a little device that will adapt SCART input to VGA output, and it will also it'll split the sync pulses, the horizontal and vertical sync pulses, so those can be fed accordingly to a VGA device that supports 15 kilohertz RGB, and you can have a really nice display. And also there will be an integrated odd and even line scan generator on there too.
Oh, cool. All right. So it's like a sync strike that also has RGBS to RGB HV switching and a scanline generator on there.
Correct.
That's
And
a very handy piece of equipment.
it's a very small footprint. I would say it's the whole device. Oh yeah. Smaller than this programmer here. Probably, yeah,
Very cool.
much smaller. Very small little footprint. Something that you can use if you have a monitor that does that. And I might even throw. I might even throw an 1881 on there too, if you want to use it or if you need to use it. But
Any. So I'm only thinking about this because I get a lot of emails about this now. Will that handle RGSB as well, or is that would that require a totally different chip?
syncing sync on green.
Yeah.
Is that what you're at? Is that what you just asked? It can. I'm glad you mentioned that, Bob. You smart bastard. You. I can implement that very easily, and I think I will. You sexy bastard.
Because it's for PS2, I prefer it, and I
Yeah.
keep talking to
Yeah,
Phone
big
Dork.
time.
I gotta get him on here to talk to him as well. But he uses Sync on Green for his Xbox, and he claims that he sees a noticeable difference. So that would be a big help as well.
Yeah, I can do that. That's an excellent suggestion, and I'll put that in there for sure. It's really good.
Because even because I'm always I guess the best way to say it is once people cross a certain threshold with this stuff, they start to realize you need a lot more than if you want to just play Genesis, you buy Genesis, you buy a TV or an RGB monitor, you buy the one cable, you're done. But then
Right.
you start talking about things like, well, what if I want to split the signal? What if I want to do a capture solution? What if I want to mix these three consoles? So just the thought of like having a SCART in and then having that VGA port out, and then you go right into any other device that you want after that. That's
Right.
helpful. I could
Yeah.
think of 1,000 solutions that would or things that would be a solution for at the moment.
It's a very multifaceted utility that can get you going. It's very inexpensive. I mean, I'm not going to try. It's not going to be a very expensive little board at all. The purpose of it is not only to do the things that you're talking about as a utility for other things, but somebody doesn't have a lot of money, but they can go buy a $25 or $30 LCD monitor that'll do 15 kilohertz RGB and 50 and 60 hertz beautifully.
Yeah.
They can buy a $25 board, and for under $60-$70, they can have a really nice setup that will do native RGB and with scan lines.
Relatively low lag too. There's a bunch of pretty
Relatively
decent
low
monitors
lag.
out there as well.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah,
know if there are any
absolutely.
CRTs that you know of, CRT VGA monitors that would be able to handle those? Because I've only tried one or two, but they're getting rarer and rarer these days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would. I mean, an HD CRT with RGB with a 40 with a VGA input, it'll certainly work, but I can almost guarantee you it will look like complete shit.
Oh yeah.
Because typically, your HD CRTs are typically the widescreen, like
No,
the.
I'm talking about an old computer monitor. Like an old
Oh, you mean
CRT
oh yeah,
computer
oh
monitor.
yeah. I have a beautiful I have a beautiful 21-inch Sony Trinitron multi-sync that would look excellent on. Absolutely. It's actually pretty popular. It was a pretty popular setup to use like an XRGB2 as a line doubler to get up to 30, 31 kilohertz or 30, 31 hertz kilohertz. I'm sorry.
See,
To line double.
if we can get a list of those though, because you just hit the
out.
nail on the head. There's there's a lot of need for an inexpensive device like that, and if you have people, that don't have the ability to spend a bunch of money, but really just want to enjoy as high quality of these old games, to buy one or two SCART cables, buy that. Yeah, maybe they already have their own consoles, and then go to a Goodwill and pick up a really high-end, because a lot of those multi-sync CRT monitors were well over $1,000 when they came out. Now you can probably get them for $20-$30. So
This one right here was $3,100 when it came out, and that's what made it so popular in the 90s during the heyday of the XRGB2. When you and I were probably just in our 30s back then. It was a very popular setup was to have an XRGB2 that would line double your 15 kilohertz stuff into a really nice VGA monitor. That was the pinnacle, or that was the ideal setup. People just don't do it anymore. But we are talking about retro games and using retro equipment, so it only makes sense to at least talk about do VGA CRTs still have a place for enthusiasts? I think they do. I think they absolutely do.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, the picture quality is outstanding on a lot of VGA, even low grade, even shitty VGA monitors. They can typically yield a really nice high quality picture because you can dial them in. Yep.
Do you know about when you're gonna get that'll be ready for release?
How dare you ask me that?
You knew that was coming.
Man, I would like to have. I've got it pretty much laid out. I've pretty much got everything laid out the way I want it to. Of course, I'm going to have to add a few more discrete things to do SOG or sync on green.
And just like everything else, I'm sure you'll get your first revision back and then want to change one or two things. So.
Be a couple of things, maybe a route here or there. I might want to move that component over or something. But yeah, I would hope I would like to have that done by Thanksgiving or before Thanksgiving.
That's awesome. That's good.
Yeah, because I really started that. I wanted to. I've always liked monitors that sync down to 15 kilohertz, but the truth is, man, this is really expensive, and it's a little more expensive than I think it really needs to be. Mm-hmm. And if I can do something that can get somebody going with a competent $60, $70 setup that's a display and everything that they need for all of their old consoles to work, well, that'd make me feel good. In fact, I just might cry about it.
Well, that's awesome. I think it's a perfect way to end this, man. You're a humanitarian and a retro gaming helper here. So
yeah,
thank you for everything. I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about this. I appreciate you letting me bug you all these months about crap. But thank you for all your help in the scene and everything, and for making all this crap that we all love. And I'm sure I'm going to have you back on here within a year. So everybody will see you again. So as always, everybody, comments well appreciated. Criticism. Tell me I suck. We want more Voltar, less Bob. That's fine. Just comment away, and we'll respond as we get a chance to. So.
I am here to service your bodies.
Take care, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
See you guys next week.
I'll see you, Bob. Later, guys.